I want to make sure that we have all the time that we need for a panel discussion, so I'm not going to say too much, except to reiterate that tomorrow is going to be our student-friendly day, and so we're going to have a lot of students that are going to be on campus here, and I highly encourage you to strike up conversations with them and be generous with your time, because they're going to be our future, and I want to make sure that we're providing a bridge for them. So without further delay, I will hand it to Thomas Bause Mason and let you introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Happy to see that we still have some audience left. I know we are the last session of the day. Hopefully an interesting topic, navigating AI standards development and adoption. Really want to talk about standardization, what's going on in standardization, what's already happening in terms of AI standardization, what are the plans, how can we get involved, and what's next, what effect will it have on SMPTE, and so on. So maybe we go into the next slide. I don't have a clicker. Oh. All right. So AI investment, just from Goldman Sachs investment into AI for the next up to 2025, and you can see it's quite dramatic. We have almost a doubling of the investment in the U.S. So very significant, and obviously AI is really a hip topic. A lot of the talk currently is about what AI can do. There's not so much focus, at least not in some of the discussions on what we can do and what needs to be done in terms of AI regulation and AI standardization. I just want to put this up as from our Chinese colleagues, a diagram which really symbolizes how technical standards not only accelerate economic growth, but they also support innovation. And there's a kind of a feedback loop that economic growth also then helps technical standards. I talked this morning a lot about how standards are being used in legislation and how governments are looking at standards organization for coming up with solutions so that they can implement their policies. All right. That we mainly want to have a panel discussion today. I have a few folks here with me. Maybe we're going around and you introduce yourself, name, title, and organization.
That's all.
And then we get into,
Hans Hoffmann from the European Broadcasting Union, Department of Technology and Innovation.
Fred Walls. I work for AMD. I'm a fellow. I'm also the chair for TC10E and SMPTE, as well as the Joint Task Force on AI.
I'm Andy Maltz, founder and principal of General Intelligence. The opinions expressed by me are my own, really. I'm also chair of ISO TC36 Cinematography, which is the international standardization technical committee for the motion picture industry.
For the audience, I'm just curious, who of you is involved in AI standardization efforts? If you can raise your hand, I'm curious. Okay, so we have quite a few people here. So after all, it's a SMPTE conference. And who is involved? Who wants to invest in AI technology? Who will use AI technology in the near future? Well, quite a few. So it's certainly, of interest. And with that, I think we should dive into our panel discussion and go around the horn and just we have different organizations represented here. We have the EBU, we have ISO T36 with Andy, SMPTE. I was said I would speak for the U.S. and for the efforts in the U.S. and NIST. I'm just because we have my presentation up, I'm going to start and just go to my slides and talk a little bit about what's going on in the U.S. U.S. efforts, there was an executive order in October 2023. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. President Joe Biden, the White House, issued this executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence comprehensive documentation. So the goal really was here to developing guidelines, standards, and best practices for AI safety and security, and then advance these global technical standards. So this is not just a domestic effort. They realize that they have to look at a global scale, drive the technical standards development in AI. NIST, you may be familiar with. It's part of the Commerce Department of the U.S. government. They reacted to this executive order, and they published in July 26, 2024, an AI risk management framework that is really meant, so they have different parts. They started with part 1, and that is generative AI profile. It has this really nice name, NIST AI 601. And that's really to help organizations identify unique risks posed by generative AI, and proposes actions for this generative AI risk management that best aligns with these goals and priorities, really helping people who want to get into the AI business to make sure that they navigate all the risks connected to them. There's a vocabulary to this as well. I didn't put this up here, but just so you know. And then NIST did also develop a plan for global engagement on AI standards. They did realize if we want to look at AI standards in NIST, then that has to happen in conjunction with International Standards Organization. There are other standards efforts which coming from other countries, and that is valuable information and needs to go into AI standards forming. So that's a really interesting idea as well. And then the U.S. Copyright Office, I mentioned that too. They came out with a report, copyright and artificial intelligence, part 1, digital replicas. And that's really to address some of the legal issues and policy issues in terms of what it can do with the images of individuals during their lifetime. So that's really trying to combat AI fakes. So that's really that. There are some commercial efforts. I should mention Random House. I don't know if you heard the news. They updated their end user license, and AIs are not allowed to use Random House books for their training data. So that's prohibited. So I think there's a lot of commercial efforts which are trying to stop AI models to harvest their information. So that's my part. Maybe you're going over to Hans and talk about the EU and what's happening, EBU
and EU,
and what's happening in the EU.
But there's a difference between EU and EBU, but not a big one. Not a big one. So I think the most prominent example, what we see coming from the European Commission, was the AI Act, and I think it's very well known. The separation into the 4 different risk levels. What we have, the unacceptable part, so they have said unacceptable, high, limited, and little risks. Unacceptable is actually AI systems which would manipulate humans. I mean, that is, of course, one example. High would be potential harm to safety or critical infrastructures. But this is not really related to the media environments per se. I think what we see more is the limited risk level and the little risk level. This is more consumer-facing AI products. I'm personally a little bit surprised that it's called little risk, because this goes into the area of chatbots, of game engines, of all this consumer-related stuff, which is pretty unregulated at this point of time. The Commission realized this. So there are now a couple of efforts underway in order to address, in particular, you've mentioned already the copyright side. So there is great concern, particularly, and then we move already over to the EBU, great concern by public service broadcasters, but probably also by private, by publishers and so forth, that the machines which are actually scraping websites, that they use to training data in an unauthorized way. I mean, there have been technologies out, robot.txt, etc., but this is, it's a suggestion, I would say, and they have a lot of flaws. Now, the idea is that we come back now to the standard question. The idea is that we develop new forms of technologies and standards which would help us to avoid the so-called data scraping. Not going into opt-in, opt-out at this point of time. So that's a bit, and we work, of course, together once the EBU members, the R&D centers have found solutions, but maybe also solutions are found here, which are better than robot.txt or TDM, what we see from W3C, that we propose this then as standards, do pilots, and develop this further. The other elements, what we are in the EBU very much investigating, is amongst the EBU members to assess what are the different AI strategies of our EBU membership. EBU, for those who don't know, has 113 broadcasters in the membership. We sit in Geneva and then have pretty much region 1 of the ITU as our membership. So strategies, almost every broadcaster now, from the bigger ones, they have an head of AI or AI department or whatever you want to call it. They develop a strategy for the organization. Broadcasters traditionally who live from news actually consider the ethical guidelines as a very important element in this. Much more important than technology at the beginning. Because it's very dangerous if a broadcaster puts something out which is violating ethical guidelines just because the journalist has used certain technologies which he should not use in generating content. Then it's, of course, that we look into the core of technology. Alex sits here. He's working a lot together with our EBU members, technical departments, the R&D centers to find technological answers in terms of what does the influence of machine learning AI has for public service media organizations. What are, at the end, beyond PowerPoints, which we all love, at the end, what does it bring in efficiency increase? One of the prime examples is what we have from one of our EBU members who has almost completely brought in machines to do the subtitling. And this is, of course, a efficiency increase, a clear efficiency increase. Then we can work with translation systems. We have a news pilot system, Eurobox, etc., and so forth. That's another element of the activities what we have. And of course, amongst the EBU members, there's a lot of interaction in terms of how can we use AI systems to create new forms of content, improve content generation, but always considering the ethical guidelines around this. Let me just see what else are we doing. I've talked about scraping. Fighting disinformation. The core thing for broadcasters, particularly public service media organizations. So you have, the elections come up here in the US. You have the same topic like everybody else in the world. That is the misinformation thing. So you either work on technologies which help you to detect, and this is an arms race. So you detect, you found the technology for the detection. The next day already, there are new tools out. The other opportunity what we have is, of course, to work with verification. And a prime example is here C2PA, the work what the IPTC is doing, the C2PA organization is doing, what CA is doing. And we are experimenting here, already quite successful, how this can be deployed at a broadcaster level. I think, and there was also a session today, or will be sessions tomorrow. Yeah, we'll talk about the applications. That's a very important area of work for us. And then maybe the last one, before I hand over, amongst many topics, what we do is an increasing activity in the EU and EU-funded R&D projects. One is called Vera AI, which looks after verification tools. The other one is called TEMS, and that's interesting. It's all about creating data spaces, safe, secure data spaces for organizations. And this has been done in the medical, it's done in the aerospace industries, in the automotive industry, and there is an idea now to deploy this also for media industries. So you can imagine the studios would have their safe data space under which they can operate in a secure manner with data, with AI algorithms, with training data. And the same also for broadcast organizations. Just to mention this here, and then I hand over before I talk too much.
Yeah, Fred, you can certainly talk about the SMPTE efforts and what we're doing in SMPTE, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, again, I'm kind of representing SMPTE on this panel. So back in 2020, we had this idea that AI was going to be something that would be really powerful and influential in media. And so we got together, and actually Hans was, involved in that as well. But
he was. Where's Alex sitting, by the way? I don't see him. Okay. Yeah.
And also the ETC. So the ETC is an organization that's out of USC that is heavily engaged with studios and things like that. And Dr. E. Berquist, lent a lot of his expertise to kind of help us come up with a report. So our initial effort was to try to come up with an engineering report. So this is a strategy that SMPTE has done in the past, where we sort of take a look at everything that's going on in the landscape, and then we try to document it so that we can understand, well, here are some opportunities that are out there for standards and other types of things. And so as part of that research, we actually did a survey of the entire SMPTE membership. We also had numerous roundtable discussions through the ETC, where we would get together, we would talk with various thought leaders around the industry and really try to understand, what are they doing with AI? What are their concerns? What are the things that they're thinking about, right? And a lot of the issues that came up, we documented in that report. And, things that we've already sort of talked about, right? So there's aspects of risk management, like AI ethics is something that came up an awful lot. Interoperability among systems. So you have all these different AI systems that are sort of custom and built around these, sort of de facto standards. I know, Thomas, earlier you talked about de jure versus de facto standards. So a lot of AI work has sort of been under this de facto sort of banner, where somebody goes out and they do something. Maybe they publish it on GitHub, and then, maybe somebody else grabs it and they do something else with it and try to build on that. But there's also a place, I think, in this space for sort of de jure standards. So I encourage people, that's on the SMPTE website, to review the engineering report if you haven't. We're going to continue to try to maintain that as kind of a living document. And then also SMPTE is getting involved in some standardization projects. So we've had proposals for 3 different projects that have come primarily through the work that Alex has been doing. So first of all, looking at standardizing AI like a model registry. So metadata around models, things like some of the data you would find in model cards, but just kind of figuring out like a unique way of identifying, like, this is the model that I used when I did this run, or this, this piece of inference or whatever, or did this training exercise, those types of things. There's another project where we're talking about embeddings. So a lot of AI models today have representations of, sort of like a state space of, where different things are, as far as, this is similar to this other thing, right? This image or this piece of text or whatever is either similar to this, or maybe it's far away. And, you can think of it as kind of a map, although these maps are like sort of these multi-dimensional vector spaces, right? And so there's a need to sort of understand, you have different AI models, and that space looks different for each of those different AI models. And so how do you interoperate? Like, how do you apply one model to, that has one vector space, and use it in conjunction with another model that uses a different vector space. And so that's an area that we're going to investigate and sort of look into. And then the last project has to do with using LLMs for basically metadata generation is the primary application for this, but trying to come up with metadata that's relevant for LLM application to metadata generation, right? So looking at like how can you reproduce, for example, like the run that you did. So that might include things like the prompt and the hyperparameters and all these other things, so that you have sort of this auditable version of the model with, it was this model used, it was this version, it was trained on these data sets, and I can reproduce it exactly using some small amount of metadata. And one last thing that's going on in SMPTE, to Hans's point about C2PA, is there's a project that's been started to start looking at embedding that data into things like MXF files, right? So getting that the sort of that identity and that provenance information like throughout the chain, so that you can sort of understand what happened to that content as it goes through not only just distribution, but also kind of the different stages of production. And it could be applied as post-production processes happen, or encoding happens, or these other types of things. And so I think that's also going to be very powerful, because I think this idea of fake media is going to become more and more of a problem. We can already see that it's a huge risk and a huge financial opportunity, let's call it, for people who are bad actors. And so I think at some point what we'll see is kind of like the transition from HTTP to HTTPS, where, now you try to use your browser and you go to a HTTP site and it'll say, oh, this is a terrible idea. I think we may see a transformation like that in media, right? Where, you go to a piece of media, and if it's not authenticated, maybe your technology tells you like, don't trust this, like, the whistle should go off.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. I mean, really interesting. And I think in the report you also talk a bit about, the standards ecosystem outside of SMPTE and what's being done. But Andy, as the ISO TC36 chair, you're deeply involved in what's happening in ISO. We had some discussions with people in ISO. So maybe you tell us a little bit about what's going on in ISO in terms of standards development, and if we could bring up Andy's PowerPoint.
Sure thing. And while we're vamping here, that engineering report is awesome. And if you haven't read it yet, I suggest you do, and start early, because it's a lot of information in there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about everything that's not SMPTE and from an international perspective. And let's see, how do we start this? You have to turn my slides on to presenter view.
Yes.
I mean there we go. Now I click, right? No. Yeah, I'm not good with these technical things.
This needs to be turned around. This is the presenter view.
There we go. Let's back up one. So do I hit the red arrow to back up? All right. Back up. There we go. Okay. So again, international activities. And again, I'm Andy Maltz, and I'm the TC36 chair. But what's gotten really interesting in the international space is there's so much work going on in so many different areas and in places that here in Hollywood we wouldn't ordinarily show up. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. But first, just a show of hands, how many are familiar with ISO TC36? Okay, that's respectable. So why ISO TC36? We have SMPTE. What do we need this other committee for? Well, I'll get to that. So TC36 is among the first ISO TCs formed. ISO was formed in 1947, which was well after SMPTE was formed in 1916, I believe, right? And TC36, you can tell by the low number, that was officially formed in 1952, but it grew out of predecessor organization and has its roots all the way back to the earliest days of SMPTE, when it was SMPTE. Right. And so far as we know, SMPTE has always been the committee secretariat and still holds that position. Very important and powerful position, because it gets to choose the chair, or nominate the chair and run the committee. So any of you that have done standards work know how important the role of the committee manager is to the success of the standards. So TC36 exists because it's an internationally accredited standards development organization, which is something different than an international membership organization, which is what SMPTE is. And while SMPTE is a U.S. accredited standards development organization and its standards are respected globally, in some countries it has to be an ISO standard in order for it to carry weight. So there's a little more to the history to it, but not enough time to cover that. TC36 maintains all international photochemical film, sound, and ancillary standards, and 24 of SMPTE's digital cinema standards. So not every standard that SMPTE writes and publishes has to go up there, but in the case of digital cinema, because of the transition from film projection to digital projection, we needed that global standard in order for a global cinema industry to continue to thrive. And I think it grew like 4x, once we went digital from film. So that was a huge success, showing the importance of standards economically. So recent work within TC36, I should mention up on the slide here, that's the home page, and I'll give you QR codes at the end of my opening. So we have 32 countries that are participating in SMPTE, 11 of them, on TC36, that are participating actively, 114 published standards. We have 4 projects underway right now. Recent work are technical parameters for 3D stereoscopic cinema projection, improving alignment between the ISO and SMPTE versions of the digital cinema standards. That's actually harder than you might think, and it shouldn't be. New work, technical parameters for emissive cinema displays, and our business plan. So every ISO TC has to have a published strategic business plan. We just finished the update of ours, and among the items in the business plan for new work is evaluating the potential for work in AI, obviously, and environmental sustainability. So actual standardization of AI at the ISO level is going on. All right, here's a mouthful. ISO IEC JTC1 SC42, and I'll say it 3 times quickly if you'd like at the end. So that committee's been in existence for several years. As you can see, there's quite a bit of international participation in that one. It's with 66 countries, and they just had their plenary earlier in the month. I think something like 300 people there. I mean, there's a lot of activity going in there. So JTC1, it stands for Joint Technical Committee. It's where many of our international information technology standards come from across a wide range of disciplines. Obviously, artificial intelligence is one of them. SC42 has a liaison relationship with TC36. So as of now, SC42 members can see TC36 documents, and we're in the process of setting up a liaison relationship to go the other way. So we have access to their documents, and I believe, if I'm not speaking out of turn, SMPTE is in the process of establishing. Should I stop? Is good?
No, I think you're correct. It's actually in October, just before this conference, SC42 had a plenary, and I hope that at that point the category A liaison was approved.
Yeah, so this is really important because all this work, as you'll see when I get to the next slide or two, there's so much work going on. We all have to be talking to each other in sectors where we don't ordinarily spend time. So just to highlight a few of the standards and technical reports that SC42 has already published, they're mostly foundational concepts and terminology, risk management, governance, management systems. And also, I think important for our industry, use cases. So the reason they connected with TC36 is they wanted to understand what the media and entertainment issues were, and that started the dialogue. They reached out to us. We didn't go chasing after them. So that was really very much appreciated. So they're partnering with standards communities in specific verticals to help with their particular AI work programs if these other communities are interested. So you'll notice this one at the bottom there, application of AI technologies in health informatics. I'm sure you've read about the medical applications of AI technologies, and there is a demand, a requirement for standards in those areas. So we'll see over time if there's work to do in the M&E vertical at the international level. I suspect that there will be. Also, IEEE has its standards association, and they don't get as much press as SC42 does. I think IEEE doesn't have as big a marketing and PR department as ISO does, but they are ANSI accredited. They have a Cat A liaison relationship to SC42, and they're also what's called an ISO Partner Standards Development Organization, which means an IEEE standard can be fast-tracked and maintained in a very efficient way at the ISO level. So very strong and efficient relationship in the standards there. So they currently have 9 published standards on machine learning, deep learning, 48 active AI projects covering, and this is kind of important because it's specific, governance and practice of artificial intelligence as related to computational approaches to machine learning, algorithms, and related data usage. So it's really kind of a computer science-y type of standards. So that's where they work. And then there's this whole area of pre-standardization, and I think that's primarily where we are in the standardization world right now, at least our standardization world. So pre-standardization is actually a defined term. You know, it's research, gap analysis, requirements development, and it requires funding to do this work in a collaborative way in preparation for the actual standards work. As I'm sure Fred, will tell you, and Alex can tell you, you don't just walk in the door and say, I'm going to go do the standard. There's a bunch of work to do, and you ought to have, some consensus and some collaboration going on before you start on that venture, because standards take a lot of work, and they are consensus standards. By definition, you have to have agreement, so you have to have all the stakeholders together. So these are the few of the organizations that are in the pre-standardization phase. I told you a little bit about TC36, what we're doing. We're in the process of setting up a couple of ad hoc groups that do some study. That's really where you start. The United Nations has something called the AI Advisory Body on artificial intelligence. They held a bunch of workshops with various communities, including media and entertainment, and I was through the TC36 work invited to participate, and that is really interesting. I heard a lot of perspectives I hadn't heard, and also offered up a number of perspectives that are important to this industry. They issued a report last month, and one of the recommendations, you think at the UN, they're thinking about sustainability development goals and things like that. There was a specific recommendation for the creation of an AI standards exchange. All right. For those of you that track this sort of thing, you know that ITU is also, I think it's a UN agency, right? So, pardon me? Subgroup, yeah. Yes. So it's plugged into that. So also at the international level is the AI for Good enterprise. This is the World Standards Coordination Agreement that was just published a few months ago by IEC, ISO, and ITU, again, to collaborate on these standards. They produced AI for Good produced a sustainability impact report and a whole lot of press releases about the work that's coming. And then there's the Moving Picture Audio and Data Coding by Artificial Intelligence group from the folks that brought you MPEG. They've published a lot online. I'm not sure how much traction that's really gotten and how it really plugs in, but trying to be inclusive here of everything that's going on out there. So with that, here's a bunch of QR codes for you. I think if you take a picture, you can grab the QR codes later on. So TC36, you can get the business plan. SC42, you can get all their list of standards. The UN ABAI report that's another good read. I'd recommend that. Governing AI for Humanity. AI for Good has a really nice platform where you can see recordings of. There's some standards conferences plus some other workshops that they've done, and IEEE, the Standards Association, about that, and then MPAI, a whole bunch of stuff to read there. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, I was really positively surprised that ISO actually came to us and wanted to have us at the table. They could make clear that they felt that in the current discussion which is happening, there was a part missing. There's a gap, and that gap is media. And so they wanted us really to come to the table to be part of that discussion. I don't think they expected at the moment, that there was too much input coming from us, because they're very much in this fundamental standards mode to make sure that they have the standards to really define and measure what AI is. But at a certain point, they're going to get to this vertical, to these different verticals, and then there's going to be standardization. So my question really to the panel is, how can we prepare for that? How do we get the expertise into SMPTE, to tackle these standardization questions? And how do we get the industry, the media industry, involved? And maybe because Hans, you look really stressed, I start with you. What do you think?
You can't stress me. You can't stress me. Well, I think we need to talk to the big players and to the small players who have knowledge. And these are from the big side, I think it's the big tech companies, of course, and in particular with their developers, in particular with their strategists around cloud services for media, which are based on machine learning or AI, whatever you call it. And we need to build up also a link with smaller companies, the startup community, which is very vibrant in the media space. So, because they are also looking out to the next big things. And I think our enemy in this whole attempt for standardization is time, because the developments are extremely fast. And even if we have not agreed, I think, on an AG06, and already it could be obsolete. Just to the extreme. Huh? So beyond this very nice efforts, and of course I support all of that, what the ITU and this World Standards Organization is doing and so forth. What we face in EBU is that developing a recommendation, developing even the slightest approach, and we don't do standards. We had this not written agreement with SMPTE that you do that for us. And now today I talk about EBU. I'm EBU and not SMPTE representative. Speed is our enemy here. But I miss actually that we have here the forums and have the big players on the table, the knowledgeable people from the big companies. And I think this is maybe one of the first things what I would do in terms of approaching, and then say the question, what are the next big things you have in mind? How can we achieve interoperability? How can we transform and translate ethical guidelines into the software which is developed? How can we ensure that data which is used for training purposes is used in an ethical way, is not scraped, is not written to copyright informations? And all of these questions need to come on the table, and then we say, this is an area where we need a standard, and let's do it with high speed together. First approach. I come back later on with other things.
Fred, what do you think?
Yeah, I can't help but think that Hans was like nudging me here, but anyway, the SMPTE standard process is actually fairly efficient and streamlined compared to some other organizations, but it is still a due process organization, and there are still certain things that we must do, as a matter of course. So definitely the things that make it go faster are, kind of like Andy said, like if you have something that's baked that you can just bring in and just say, hey, this is something that, we're working on and we'd like to standardize it. That tends to go more efficiently than, hey, I have this great idea for, something and, hey, can we go figure out how to do this, right? That's probably a recipe for slowness if it gets done at all. So,
but I think maybe we need to also ask the question about, do we need a standard or do we need another type of description for agreements? We have the RPs, we have the engineering guidelines, we have the study reports, etc. Maybe in this time of where we live, the software, much more than we did in the past, hardware-based interoperability standards, we need another type for agreements.
Yeah, and there have been those types of discussions in the past with technical specifications and things like that, where So, I mean, it kind of goes back to, I think, I watched Thomas earlier talking about, how SMPTE started and how we all had to come to some sort of agreement on where the holes were in the analog film, right? So I think where standards start is interoperability, right? So like, where are the things that we can agree as sort of common points of, where we can build from, right? So obviously people are going to push the limit and try to build these bespoke systems and that have incredible capabilities in some cases, right? And maybe for them, like they can generate enough market to where like, well, maybe standards aren't really a priority, right? But like for the users, right, the people who need to consume these products, right, being locked into some monopoly of, single source provider of some technology is not really a great situation, right? Like ideally you want like a vibrant sort of ecosystem with different providers. And that's where we'd like to get to, frankly. And I think what we're doing to kind of enable that is trying to engage, right, with the people in this room and then across the industry, right? So that's the goal of these roundtable discussions that we had with ETC, the surveys, and so on. We're just trying to identify these needs and these pain points. And if this is something that you feel sort of resonates, with you, like we're also going to have a breakout session tomorrow, which hopefully, we'll talk about a little bit later. But, where we can just kind of talk through some of those things, like what are the things that are the pain points and where are the areas where standards would add value for the types of things that you're doing.
Yeah, you pointed at my earlier presentation. I should say not everything has to be a standard. We're a de jure standards developing organization. That means what we're developing as a standard has legal standing and official recognition. So we need to think about where in this development process of AI do we need that kind of document, right? If we don't need that legal standing and the official recognition, it shouldn't be a standard, maybe, right? But Andy, please go ahead.
So yes, and all right to everything that has been said so far, and the and part is this is bigger and more broad than any technology-driven disruption this or any other industry has seen before, maybe since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so if you buy into that, and I do, and if you're not convinced, you look at the different organizations that are paying attention to this right now. So, Fred, I think you might have read my notes. It's engage. So I'm just saying engage. All right, at this stage of the game, and that's really hard because in our industry, there's been a lot of contraction. Because of finances. There's what typically happens, and you go back to when sound was introduced, that individual companies will try to stake their claim, right? Whether you're a user of a technology or a developer of a technology, you want to be first to market, and you're going to do everything you can. And co-opetition and collaboration, that doesn't even enter into the discussion at that point because there's all this innovation that's going on and turf grabbing that's going on. And that's a natural part of the innovation process. But inevitably, you get an industry gets to a point where the pain points become apparent and the things that nobody makes any money on, but everybody has to do shows up. And there's this groundswell to, yes, let's all, link arms together. Well, most of us, because there's always someone, outside saying, no, you don't want to do it that way. You don't want to do it at all, right? So I believe we're still in this phase in our industry where there's a lot of the positioning, the figuring it out with constrained resources. So it's very hard to get everybody together. And I think this is a great start. I think more of this. And the other piece of it is the people at the table, the players at the table. One of the other shifts that happened is M&E's reliance on big tech for its tooling, right, and its technology. And those of you that have been around for a while know that everybody loves the movies and TV show and the big names because they get a lot of press out of that. I'm not so sure how important that is this time around because AI is its own character and its own has its star power. So how much do you really need, Hollywood to go sell your tech? So maybe there's a little less incentive than usual for the technology providers to understand our requirements, which also means we need to articulate our requirements, right? And I think the engineering report does a really good job of starting on all of that. So engaging with these other groups, getting our tech providers more involved in our conversations beyond I got this great toolbox here, go build your applications on top of that and, pay us for compute and storage and all of that. And that's going to take some time, but dollars to donuts, we're going to end up in the same place. We will have some standards. And also to your point, Hans, about time to develop the standards, a problem. I don't know the answer, how to solve that. But good standards are good standards, right? And if you shortcut it, you're not going to have a good standard. So how do you get a good standard and not shortcut? Smarter people than me will figure that out.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. To be honest, I'm filling in for somebody who should have been the moderator, who works for a big media company, which did not allow that person to participate because it was a discussion about AI, and that was just a hot topic for them. So I think there are players who really kind of like hesitant to get involved in this stage because, as you said, it's so unclear what's actually happening, A, in legislation, and B, in applications and all this. But go ahead.
Just you said legislation, and that's another dynamic that we haven't had to deal with before. What's the most legislation that media and entertainment has had to deal with? The CALM Act, right? Or like don't make your trailers too loud, or turn your commercials down. That's like the biggest thing we've had to deal with. But this Copyright Office report, it made it very clear there will be new legislation, all right, at the federal level, right? And in California, the big one got knocked down. But it will happen, and it will impact us, and the technical part will be affected as well. So what's the expression, out of the room, out of the deal? We've got to be in the room.
Yeah, maybe I didn't mention that, actually. I think that the copyright report was really meant for Congress with a demand that there will be legislation and federal law to protect copyright.
I mean, GPTR was a good example, which has impacted everybody, the whole world, and then was, of course, adopted in other countries in other forms. And now we see the same with the first types of regulation coming in this space of AI, machine learning, and the usage of it. And this need to be translated into impact for the technology and later on standardization. I mean, when we talk about the media data spaces, which I've addressed before, media data spaces should not be proprietary. We want actually to create media data spaces out of the industry, which provides different software products to it. And this need to interoperate. And then you want to cross between different data spaces in order to generate an ecosystem where you have many participants in contributing. At the end of the day, for us in media, it's content. We know that. And there are different players in order to generate content. So I believe there is need for interoperability in the software domains, in the data domains, in the content domains when we go into these spaces. It's just that I believe we need maybe to say goodbye to old-fashioned approaches which we had in the area of defining SDI interfaces, or in the early days of how we defined, and I'm also guilty to it, the MXF file format. At the time when we did this, it was the right approach. Now today, we need to question what is the right approach for this new era of being in a software world, in a machine learning world, in a data-driven world. And I think this is the question what we have to answer for ourselves in order to stay also relevant, because the industry is not waiting. Otherwise, we end up with a lot of proprietary solutions. The users have to buy products because you need to keep your operation running. You want to be relevant to the audiences. So I believe we have a big task in front of us.
So one of my favorite sayings, and I'm going to violate, is don't tell me what's wrong if you can't tell me what's right. Right?
Sure.
Right?
But,
So,
okay, we start somewhere, huh?
I don't know if you've noticed. So I'm going to point out what's wrong. So I don't know if you've noticed. I mean, we probably have. So if you go to some of these new companies' websites and look at their marketing materials, they're research papers. Right? Look at all the research. Since when did research papers become marketing materials? And these are deep. They're really interesting, but they get updated like regularly. There's so much research going on, and the time to market for the research to the product and the application, it's a blink of an eye. Like there's no time to document in there. And you can't slow that down. That's just the legislation will probably slow it down. I think that's why there's been so much pushback, right? From, I don't know when you get your window because to do that, I'll come back to the engineering report. I mean, that was a couple of years of really good work. Of course, at that time, I don't think people really saw what was coming. You were very prescient, the group to go work on that, and, hats off to Eve Berquist as well, because you've been talking about it for years. Well, here we are. And the freight train is moving really fast. So where do you slot in? That's another problem to solve, right? Sorry, didn't mean to kill the conversation.
Speed, but as I say, maybe it's also the old 80-20 rule. And here we're not talking about standards, huh? The old when is a document ready to be released? Which can either be a guidance or can be a technical specification, whatever. When is it ready to be released in order to keep up with the speed what the industry needs? And maybe it doesn't have to be 100%.
Yeah. So I think one thing we shouldn't lose sight of, though, is like we don't have to standardize like this is how you do an LLM or this is what a transformer is, because that's pure research, right? Like the things that we're talking about standardizing are things that are, like plumbing, basically. Like, you gotta, have water, right? If you want to have a building, right? And those types of things. So, developing things that are beneficial for media workflows, like things around metadata and sort of these media use cases that are pervasive across a lot of organizations, I think really needs to be the focus. Like we definitely can't boil the ocean. We can't go into, sort of this, this rapid innovation cycle that's going on at all these different companies, because ultimately that's a losing battle. Like a lot of organizations, I think, are taking that approach where they're trying to boil the ocean and come up with a standard for, every use case or something like that. And ultimately, I think you just can't succeed at that.
Right. We don't even know what all the use cases are yet. We're just learning that now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just a time check. If you want to take some questions from the audience, sure. We have 7 minutes left. Hans?
Maybe one last point, because this is of great concern for us at the EBU, and this is the educational part of it. I mean, yes, we did all of these fantastic standards in SMPTE and other organizations. The implementation went alongside with education. And I think also on the AI side, it's machine learning, all this stuff. The education, the literacy is super important. And organizations like SMPTE, like ISO, ITU, all of them, we have an obligation also to educate. And I think there is a lot of space here for us to make a difference.
Yeah, it's listening to you, my last words. It sounded like, we have a task force. The report should be a living document, which evolves over time. And we should think about how we can set up a summit, an AI summit in SMPTE, to bring some of the players to the table and have a discussion.
When will it be?
Next week.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, well, tomorrow. Well, we do have a little get together tomorrow. It's in the program. I forgot what the room was. It's 4:45 to 5:45. So you can come there and we talk about some of these AI problems. But quickly into the room, there's Chaitanya.
Hi. So just picking up from what Hans said, so there's the world of atoms and then there's the world of bits. And obviously, the standard development process, or even calling it a standard, is for the world of atoms and for the world of bits should be very different. because those worlds operate very differently. There's interoperability here. In the case of AI, there's multi-agent systems. So not only do you have the various platforms that should have some minimum basic expectation, but the system itself should have a minimum basic expectation which gets all the platforms to work together. So in that scenario, how do you look at something equivalent to a standard? Because it's so dynamic. Literally every month things could change. One gets acquired by the other. Suddenly it's all different again, right? So, I mean, how would you approach it?
Oh,
Well, so let's look at, I think back in my experiences with taking something big and gnarly and, how do you standardize that? So, most recent thing I can think of is the Academy Color Encoding System. So ACES, all right? And that was a totally organic, that's an example of starting standardization too late because the market just did what it was going to do. It was much slower moving than it is today, but there was a lot of assessment and there was a lot of breaking down of the problem, all right? So it was again, not as dynamic as it is right now, but I suspect, there are some fundamentals here that, will more or less be locked in. So you go for that low-hanging fruit if you can find it. I don't know that that's possible here. But that's part of the challenge of starting standardization too early or too late. What's the sweet spot? But it doesn't matter when you start it. You ought to at least start tracking what these things are because you might see some patterns emerge and those are opportunities to go do some work. And if you do the good work, then that'll stick a little bit and help drive the rest of it towards something that you can converge on.
go ahead.
I'm Jens Ohm, the chair of the Joint Video Experts team. We have recently we had quite some investigations about the potential of using neural networks in the area of video code. We are not as far yet as JPEG, who are close to finishing the JPEG AI standard. And one of the points is that for video, you need such a tremendous amount of training materials. That comes back to the point that was mentioned at the beginning. How can we get that and how can we legally use that? Our experience is that anything that has to do with images, loop filters and super resolution and interprediction, that works well with things you can use legally. But for video, it really highly depends. If you want to define a decent standard, you cannot let the company who has the best training material in their hands win. We also had many experience in that, how to really cross-check training and really verify the training that somebody has done. Very interesting things. But you cannot allow just who has better materials to have the best algorithm. Yeah, that is not the case. The question is, the question I have is, following that, do you think that in a standardization, even the ownership of training material has impact on the legal stages of the standard as IP and algorithm development nowadays? Because then we really have a problem.
Yeah. So this is actually a topic that was discussed and is mentioned in the engineering report. So what we heard early and often was training data is really important. Having publicly available training sets to work with is really important. And then we asked the question, okay, so is anyone willing to fund this? Is anyone willing to contribute to this? And the answer was crickets, right? Like nobody was willing to, put any effort towards something like that. And so, the issue with media companies is the assets, right, are the crown jewels, right? And so giving that away or donating it, to the greater good for these AI use cases is sort of, like anathema to what they're, all about, right? And so, I think it would be useful to have frameworks in place to be able to do things like federated learning, where like-minded companies could get together and say, hey, I will let you use my the set of data for training videos, as long as you don't have direct access to it, right? As long as I have some piece of compute that's operating on it privately, and then I'm sending you some sort of, encoded version of that. I think some of that might be workable, but I think that needs, sort of broader conversation as to how that would, fit together logistically. Maybe there's stuff like that going on.
Maybe Andy, quickly.
Yes, very, very quickly. So I'm going to put my U.S. citizen hat on and take off my international citizen hat. So to the point, this training data is a big problem. Even ImageNet, it has all kinds of faults in it and biases built into it. But just recently, the U.S. National Science Foundation has funded a series of workshops to go figure out how to help the creative industries. And this is a really interesting idea because it's an enabling project. You could potentially put together a project to do a federated learning system and fund the development of the training data, because there's just no way you're going to get copyrighted material. It's just not. And if you want to be Elon Musk and, grab Blade Runner like was reported today for the robo-taxi ad, fine, but we don't have as much money as he does to fight the lawsuits.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that Mark Cuban horn, but one last question. Okay,
Hi,
go ahead.
guys. So I'm actually a part of the AI task force. I'm hubbed in technology committee of 27C for cinema. I actually wanted to add to the conversations because we're talking about AI and having standardization and why it's so important. Maybe you guys can touch on why we need you touched on preset and data models, but when we're moving down to our downstream partners, why do we need standards at the start where there's biasness, where we're doing generative AI for video and content? How would that implicate the downstream of deliverables being made for video and audio distribution? That would be my question. And why is it so important? Because I'm sitting in the room. I don't know how many of you are in post-production, but I am. And sitting in post-production, I think of AI. And so I'm asking this question is, why do we need the standard now, right? You asked that question. And how do we make it interoperable for our startup companies? And then how do we make it interoperable for mass distribution for companies like Deluxe or Dolby or whoever it may be? That would be my question.
Don't boil the ocean, but
yeah, I have to say I had a hard time hearing the question.
Yeah,
so.
it's a little tricky to hear questions up here, but I think I got the general gist of it, right? So, you're looking at, I think, primarily post-production type use cases, and how do standards actually benefit AI standards in that area, right? And so I think, I mentioned earlier, right, the activities around content authentication and keeping track of like what happened to that content as it goes through kind of the post-production process, right? And so I think standards like that have a very clear value, right? Because it gives you audit trails of, for example, where something AI happened to it, right? And then standards around metadata, right, kind of tell you like, okay, well, this particular model was applied and maybe it had, these issues with it that you didn't find out until after, it was further down the chain. Maybe it got to some distribution thing, then you figured out, oh, well, it has this thing that I don't like about it, and or this other thing that could be better, right? Being able to audit and make changes after the fact, I think would add a lot of value for those types of use cases. So I think there's value with kind of these foundational, as Andy called them, low-hanging fruit sort of standards. But again, like we don't want to necessarily standardize like, hey, this is what a transformer is and what you should do with it. I think we should start kind of at the bottom and look at, the use cases and what would add value in a sort of general sense. And then, build on that foundation. So once we have those kind of, baseline standards and we have a little bit of success, and we kind of can move forward as that value proposition is proven out.
okay. Well, I get to be Mark Cuban and squeak the horn. Any one last comment?
No, thank you. Thank you for sticking with us. The room actually filled up, so I'm really pleased to see that there's quite a bit of interest in this topic. And
so when, where, tomorrow?
I was about to say
4:45.
It encourages us to do the next step, and I think we need to. This group needs to get together for a post discussion, and then we go for that summit.
Yeah. There are a number of panels that are going to be in this room in the morning as well to talk about the same subject. because I work for one of the studios that can't use those two letters. So.
Okay, so the session is called, it's at 4:45, SMPTE AI Standards Development Activities, and it is in the Whitley Heights on the 3rd floor of the hotel.
Oh, okay. It's not even on this side.
Yeah, so we'll be an interactive session, so again, bring your ideas.
Cool. Yeah, so it's on the 3rd floor, right? Right
at the hotel,
building.
And it's free.
It's free, but informal.